Hi, and welcome to this episode of Stars and Startups with me, Varun Vumidi. On this episode of Stars and Startups, we chat with Madhu of Yap. Yap powers over 200 fintech players in India currently and have started scaling to other geographies, including the African continent with their Visa partnership. Madhu discusses how Yap has stayed frugal in the 5 years it has been in operation and how they've become almost an extension to a bank's service. A partnership so strong that it saves time and money for startups that want to partner and the banks that are hungry for more business. Team Yap have raised close to $6 million in March from prominent fintech angels like co-founders of Citrus Pay, Amrish Rao and Jitendra Gupta, as well as FreeCharge and Cred founder Kunal Shah. The Series A for 4.5 million was led by BNext. Now let's go on with this conversation. So Madhu, welcome to the podcast. I've known you for quite a while. We have worked a little bit together when I was at Citrus. And we've kept in touch. And there's a lot that has happened over the last few years with M2P, Yap, Oink. There's a whole bunch of things that you've been up to. But I don't think a lot of people know M2P because I believe you're a B2B brand. So nobody would have ever interacted with you. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, Madhu, and then we can get to M2P.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having us, Varun. I think this is like one of those moments where we are being shy and not talking about what we do. It just all of us founders have that personality where we just leave the book to do the talking, and so thereby you'll rarely find us doing PR. We're not. For that matter, we don't even update our website. As frequently as we should. Being a technology company, at best, it's really bad website that we've got, right? I started out about 5 years ago when I had a very nice day job with Visa, and my colleague there, Muthu, who also is my co-founder in India. We used to, we are from the same, side of the country, so we had commonalities in terms of movies, what we do as families, and all of that. And we used to go for our chai conversations, almost every day. And you often, your conversations drift to, what you're working on, why it's not working. So we tend to sort of, come down to saying, we actually we created or we formed an hypothesis that banks are not geared to doing, things the way the world is sort of moving to, right? By that, what I mean is, we clearly in a job at Visa, what it allows you to do is to basically give you a 360-degree view, because you're perched in a position where you see a lot of these new business ideas come and get presented by banks, by non-banks, and also there's a global flavor to it, right? So because of your organization, you see things that have worked well in other markets. So you're able to relate to it in some pieces, like something that went well in Mexico. You often sort of think about, why is this not happening in India, right? And so 8, 9, which is when I was working for Citi prior to joining Visa. When I moved into Visa, there was a huge sort of cultural change for me, coming from another large respected organization. Because Citibank as a company was great franchise. It continues to be a great franchise in India. They probably brought credit cards into the country, and they continue to have a very, very strong franchise, as a bank. But I used to operate in the cards business team, where in our floor there used to be about 300 different people. Right? So you could virtually pick up a coffee in the morning, walk around the floor, spend half a day without doing a single minute of work, right? And there's so much of information exchange that used to happen, and and a lot of bright people who are out there. So it's just vibrant as an ecosystem. But when I moved to Visa, it was a huge sort of shock personally for me, because Visa at that point in time was all of 15 people in the company, right, in India as an office. It was a sales organization. I was hired as part of a global role, which was a market test in India. So I ended up meeting the same guys 3 or 4 times over. And that role also entailed a lot of people traveling during the day, during the work week. So literally, you'll have 5 or 6 faces to sort of see every morning, right? 2 months into it, and I've moved from Chennai to Mumbai, uh, and really I was like questioning myself because my family had not moved back then. I was really questioning myself, what have I done to myself, right? Because when you are in a job, you don't realize how much of value it's adding to you personally. I really had withdrawal symptoms with what CD was contributing personally for me in terms of my development and how I could interact with people, relate to businesses. But that's what I signed up for. So I then said, if we have to make this work, we have to figure out what we can sort of get best out of this, right? So that kind of shaped my outlook within the organization. Visa is a great brand, wonderful sort of set of people that they have, and phenomenally. And I always say this: Visa is the precursor to being the Uber, or the shared economy ecosystem, right? They are the first. Uber, in fact, is the Visa for ride, right? So they created that 50, 60 years ago. It still keeps humming billions of dollars in cash flow every year, right? A phenomenal business model, and they are larger than many of their bank partners globally, right? I mean, they're probably in the top 5, top 10 financial services listed companies, globally, probably about $300, $400 billion in value market cap. And then I figured that there's so much to learn in this company without interacting with people, right? You look around, you talk to folks in Singapore or US. I then took on the mantle to sort of drive the destiny within the organization without upsetting what I was set out to achieve, right? So that led me to sort of work very closely with the management team, which was here in India. UID happened, and I threw my hat in the ring and said, "Let me drive." So it was like swimming against the current. Visa as a company at that point in time was looked up as super awesome credit card businesses that they were sort of backing. Here I was trying to drive a financial inclusion initiative, right? It's clearly against the current sort of swim that I, sort of jumped myself into.
So for those who don't know UID, can you just give
so UID is Aadhaar, Aadhaar, which is a social security number equivalent that India started way back in 2009. They hired a technocrat in Nandan Nilekani to sort of drive that project. We were, thanks to me driving that project for Visa, from day zero of what's Nandan Charter, we were closely associated, or rather, we were periphery of what was happening, with UID and financial services around UID itself. So that was like really sort of great exposure for me personally. I pretty much work with every government department. To give you a perspective, the folks that we used to deal with in the government for the UID project typically are joint secretary level or above, which is a grading within the IAS sort of ranking. So any union ministry, you have the minister, you have probably a minister of state, then comes a joint secretary of that particular department. If it's commerce, you'll probably have secretary commerce, and then you have duties for whom for joint secretaries. So we used to deal with joint secretaries, which are fairly senior. If you have ever in city, my 3 levels boss above would have met the gentleman or met that lady who was driving that as a role. So that exposure really sort of opened up my eyes and to sort of see close and personal what it means to work with the government, right? So we keep hearing a lot of noise around, government is doing this, government is doing that, not doing that. But there's a huge machinery around, back there, which makes everything tick, right? Beyond all that noise and the politics of it, it's amazing how things work, right? And as a matter of fact, if you look around in this lockdown, we are actually shocked. I mean, a lot of people I speak to in other parts of the world, are actually shocked and pleasantly surprised as to how India could pull this off, right? Beyond all the chaos, there's some magic hand that is making it all tick, right? I mean, you could say that people are more. I by no means would say we are disciplined. We are not as a tribe. But the sheer fact that people sort of have been adhering to the rule of the law is fascinating for me, right? And I've had that first taste of that, back in 2010, 2011, right? So as and thereby, coming back to my story, we really had an opportunity to sort of make a difference, right? And then I realized, the power of thinking big scale. Thanks to Nandan, right? You have to think country scale, and he keeps talking about this, in every sort of forum and in his book, where you have a choice between making a big difference or a small difference. And if you go after the big difference, you probably end up doing small, but you at least have have the comfort to yourself that you actually try to do something big, right?
It
That
has a large impact. The potential for
Yeah,
impact is very large. The delta might be
absolutely.
small
Yeah,
at the scale
yeah,
that India is at. Even a small delta has a large impact.
absolutely. Yeah. So that, I mean, it occurs to you, it sort of changes you as who you are as a personality. So when you start thinking about, what you could do and, what's the societal impact that you could make, uh, you then sort of start looking at what is that big change that you could do, right? So then within the organization, I looked at what are those big ideas, big things that we could do in our limited way, which can have meaningful impact. So I looked at, some healthcare payment infrastructure sort of play. In fact, I filed a patent through Visa for that, payment product. It got, awarded. And then we looked at, in India, pension is a huge challenge. It's a state challenge. We're trying to make work. We did a lot of work with companies that were in the pension space for people. A lot of that had a recurring theme of how you could make a big difference to people's life, as well as using technology for the good, right? So it's basically saying you have access to people, resources in large companies. It's about driving that idea and rallying, getting people to rally behind that idea. I tried that. For a couple of years, and then there's also this aspect of you wanting to do something on your own. The bug of starting up was always there. My first sort of brush with entrepreneurial thing was way back in my college days, where just for the lack of access to cash, you try to do petty things, and from then on, it's just been there, right, in your back of your mind. But just your middle class upbringing doesn't let you go out of that comfort to actually sort of try things out, because you have certain goals, certain aspirations that your family sort of enforces on you and things like that. So it's always in the back of your mind. It's something that you want to do, but you don't have that. You don't want to take that leap of faith. But then this exposure with UID and some of the volunteers, where nothing beyond making a change for the country drove them back from their comforts in the US and come and do volunteer work. Right. I had the good fortune of just interacting with a bunch of them, people who had like great life back in the US, green cards. They could have virtually settled there, right, for eternity. But they came back. They felt that it's their calling to come back and do some good, right? So thereby, something in me sort of felt that we should do this, something on our own. And in
So
that,
from
yeah,
there, how did that switch to M2P and all of these things?
yeah,
So
sure,
you just decided while at Visa, you're like, hey, this is something that's really cool. Getting a lot
that's
of
right.
inbound requests for such a platform or a service that Visa could offer, and they're like, hey, maybe I could do this myself instead of doing it in house.
True.
Was
Yeah.
it about, because it seems like at Visa you were having a great time learning, growing.
So we had great. Correct. So the big challenge was that when you put things out, the downside to companies like that is that you don't control the destiny as much, right? So you are dependent on banks. You can build a great idea, great product. Implementation of it is in the hands of bank financial institutions who don't look at it as a hobby activity. They go by ROI, right? A lot of the ideas that we put out, were never sort of took off, or not for the lack of depth in the idea, just the fact that the execution horsepower was missing in banks, or the technology was not existent. So that kind of started, getting built up as frustration in terms of not being able to put or see the execution side of things, right? As well as we also realized a number of things that we were doing. We never had platforms that were capable of solving for the new world order, right? By that, what I mean is, at a very fundamental level, if you look at banking infrastructure globally, banks have been around for many decades, right? Movement of money has been there for probably 20, 30 years, where you have checks, different forms of moving money. As a case in point, PayPal came into existence 20 years ago, right, with the promise of saying we'll move money like moving, saying an email, right? 20 years out, you still have the same set of challenges in the US as moving money, right? It takes 3 days unless you're in PayPal. Things have the more things change, the more they have remained the same, right? And so
but I think
yeah,
that's specific to the US to a large extent.
yeah, sure, for sure, yeah.
India has been extremely, forthcoming.
Absolutely,
in
yeah, I'm coming to
making
that, right? So basically, if you look at markets that are not been, that don't have that legacy, have really sort of moved fast. Case in point, India, right? Where if you look at core banking systems, it is 10, 15 years old, and we have built layers and layers of on top of it, where we today have, like in payments, it's almost utility, where there's no arbitrage of cost or time that you can make it any better, right? So it's almost free. If you take UPI as an example, it costs 10 paisa for a transaction. It moves in real time. You can't make it any better, right? So what led to that is the fact that the ability for banks tech to actually go out and build at scale at one level, and also the business modeling of saying the distribution cohorts were not with the same banks. Okay? So if you look at UPI, who are powering it? It's the Phone Pays and the Bharat Pays and in all of the other, like Google Pays of the world, who really slam dunk on how you can scale and distribute efficiently, right? So it's not the banks. So a lot of the success I'll attribute it to them, right? So that's the model sort of paradigm shift that has happened in banking.
What you specifically said is that the plumbing is now created by UPI, and hence
Correct.
all these players are able to exist because of UPI, which has made it easy, and they go and create models and use cases and distribution, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you dial back 5 years ago, right, the whole wallet story was about competing with banks, right? And they blocked it. They tried all kinds of things, created regulatory sort of hurdles. Here's what happened in that 5 years between Modi Sarkar 1 and Modi Sarkar 2, right? Where you had a change in the model where from competing, you actually started collaborating. Now, every bank is fighting for who is the next Amazon or who's the next Google where I can partner with, right? So that I can be that partner of banker of choice. So the point is, what we saw 5 years ago when wallets were playing out was the fact that it was kind of antithesis to what the market was moving. We said more and more companies will go digital. There is a need to build infrastructure which are external facing. And actually, we bet on two things. One was this fact that companies will need to adopt banking and payments. Every company will become a fintech, which is a buzz term now. And also, we also saw another aspect, which was if companies are, if there are more wallets that are coming in, banks will also come in. Who's really solving for the merchant side of the ecosystem, right? So we actually said, what's interesting as a white space? We couldn't decide. So when we started out, we started two different, we bet on two horses. One was building a B2B sort of payment platform, and the other was a merchant-facing mobile-first model, right? Without giving it a form or shape. We said, if BillDesk can build it for, BillDesk is, one of the largest aggregators of bill payments. Pretty much every bill that you pay, is processed through their, backend system, because they've spent 10 years going and, building pipes with every biller in the country, right? So if BillDesk can do it for the online world and the bill payment world, can we be the platform for the offline brick and mortar infrastructure where you can create a network of merchants and then rent it out to wallet providers, banks, whoever is having a store of it, right? So that hypothesis had was very, very inviting for us, because from where we came, uh, the MPOS story was just 2 or 3 years old, right? So the likes of Square, M-Swipe, EasyTap, they were all in the second or third year of that business. But clearly, from where we sat and the business models that were written, it was that at that time, right? It didn't take off in the manner in which it was anticipated to take off. And the realization was that India was not attributing a lot of value to that cost arbitrage that was there. So back in the day, if you have to deploy a POS machine, physical POS machine, it used to cost 8 or 10 grand. The MPOS device came at half the price, right? Logically, it should have just gone through the roof. It really didn't, right? So we said India is anti. The thesis that we were building was that India is anti-hardware. Everybody will move to software. So we build merchant ecosystem software based, right? So we started putting out. So how do we do this, right? And what we realized was that what we need to do, and this is something that we picked up from Neerayal's book, right, which is Hooked, where it talks about creating incentive and building a habit.
Loops.
So we said we need to, you have to go in loops where you're able to form habit for the merchant, right? So we then started looking at what is it that the merchant wants so that he will attribute value to that product that we are putting out. So we got like 3,000 or 4,000 merchants, where the promise was that, which is the first product that we had, formally within the company, which is called Oink, which essentially solved a big problem. It continues to be a problem.
Was called
around
Oink?
Small change. Yeah, Oink was a product name.
Okay.
Where we went to merchants and said, hey, if you don't have a chutta to give back to your customers, don't give them a toffee, but push that chutta as a small change from the mobile itself, right?
That was a huge use case for wallets, right? Like push money back.
Yeah, a huge use case for correct. And it was like zero cost customer acquisition, right? So if you went to a store, he didn't have 5 rupees to give you. He's actually paying me to acquire you as a customer, right? So we actually inverted that whole model. And in the PPT material, it was like a great story, right? So we went to, I think, one of the VCs. We got commitments to raise about 5 or 6 crores in capital, and this is early 2015, right?
This was the same time. This is the same time smart cities also was becoming popular.
That's right. Yeah. So we kind of were convinced that this is a great product to build. The questions that we were kept, we were sort of forced into was that the moment this model takes off, Paytm was like 20-25 million user base at that point in time. The VC said, "Ye to Paytm ka lega," right? And in our naivety, we said we couldn't sort of challenge that that question. But
they were not wrong though. They were not wrong to a large extent. Sure. I mean, we both were in the wallet business technically at that time. And we saw what they could do with the Prime Minister's picture on the front page, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we still persisted, right? So we said, it doesn't matter if the VCs don't come. We will show traction. We will win this war by, demonstrating that this can execute, right? So we went out, we put phones in the market, right? We bought 400 or I think 400, 450, phones. We were, hit with issues that we never planned for. We got complaints like one of the owners called and said, boss, you gave a phone, the guy at the counter is watching porn, and my customers are complaining, right? So these were the things that we were to sort of grapple with. Another guy called and said, I dropped the phone by mistake, it's broken, you give me another phone, right? So we then figured that India was not ready for it, and we never persisted as well, right? So we didn't see the traction, we didn't have that money, we didn't have the conviction to go out and raise. So we said, if it is not ready, we will revisit whenever we get ready, right? But what that business did was to basically build out a whole mobile-based merchant onboarding and a merchant management system, right? So we were probably the first one to have a fully digital merchant onboarding kit. So an agent can go, he can collect documents. Only now you have all of these RegTech companies talking about, photo and doing, AI-based image capture and all of that. we had that like 5 years ago, right? So basically we said, if I can build virality by getting merchants to get more merchants, these guys have a lot of free time. So in a market area, somebody, which is exactly what some of the players today, like a Kata book, is thriving on, right? I used it, so let me tell my peers as well, right? So we somewhere couldn't get that conviction to, or we were not able to sell to ourselves to say this could potentially become a great story. But on the other side of the business, we had the whole B2B play really sort of started cranking numbers, right? Started paying our salaries. We had a lot of interest from players who were looking for, how do I work with a bank, right?
So at the same time, you're running two products. One
Correct.
is Oink,
Right.
which was kind of the wallet user acquisition play. And then you also built the what currently you're focusing on, which is
that's right.
The card infrastructure, so to speak.
That's right.
The payment
infrastructure. The early products on that was more prepaid led. So we went to it's also a learning that some of the programs that we did for microfinance companies in my visa days were huge runaway success, right? So we said we can replicate that model with that was the low hanging opportunity. So we signed up some of the gold loan companies, some of the microfinance companies like SKS and all, to move them to a digital sort of payment infrastructure for their customers, right? That started cranking volumes. That also led us to believe that there's a huge vacuum in terms of how banks and businesses sort of interact, right? So when we started, every business that we took to a bank, it used to take 6 months from the time the first meeting to actually seeing the first transaction, right? At a bare minimum, despite we being a specialized company focusing and doing only this as an activity, right? So in the first 1 or 2 years, we barely had like 8 or 10 companies that concurrently had signed up with banks, and not because of a fault at the bank's end or anything, but just the models that existed around that time were geared only to that.
Were banks just extremely open and receptive, and then saying, "Hey, we're ready to work with you"?
Some of them were. Yeah, some of them. Thanks to our role at Visa, we had access to the right relevant people. Right, we knew exactly who to sort of go and talk to, and we also knew what will nudge them to work with us, right? Because we have seen on the other side what's that business case, how it can ramp up. So we could show them a story, much like how you sell to a VC. You are basically telling them that you walk with me, I'll add so much to your balance sheet. So a number of banks have delivered on that promise as well.
So would that mean the value proposition for, say, a large bank versus a small bank is different? Or do you just say, hey, I'll work with smaller banks because I can show more value? Because I would think the top 2 or 3, HDFC, ICICI, Axis, they're not going to come and play ball, right? They're going to be like, I will build my own thing,
Absolutely.
do my own thing. You have no access, stay away from my, don't do my home turf.
Correct. So no, there are 2 things, right? One is the fact that we consciously decided not to work with large banks, simply because of the fact that typically large banks also come with larger teams, and your execution bandwidth gets choked, right? So we were a small team in a smaller bank, relatively. You have to deal. So if the business guy says yes, the rest of the organization sort of aligns with it, right? So if you get the drift of what I'm saying, in a smaller bank, you probably have to deal with 1 or 2 senior people. But in a larger bank, it could be an army of people, right, to whom you have to deal with, and you could have something come and hit you from like a recon guy can virtually stall the project for 6 months or a year, right? So thereby we consciously took a call not to work with large banks. We work with smaller banks, and they also found that if in case we add purely from a number perspective. If we have like 100 different companies working with us and we create like 1,000 crores in deposits, that's really valuable for a bank which has 20,000 crores in balance sheet, vis-a-vis a bank which has 2 lakh crores in deposits, right? So it doesn't move the needle, right? But for a smaller bank, our ability to actually go out and say, hey, I will pull the plug if you don't come onto my terms is pretty significant, right? So we took that call to work with smaller banks, and we worked with only 2 or 3 of them, and we had like a very, very close partnership. And the thing that we realized in this is that we always put the bank's interest ahead of ours, right? So we never cut them out. We never created We actually redefined operational processes. Even today, if you go to some of the banks, I can name them, like in an S bank, you go, you say that I'm doing a competing business with Madhu. I want to work with you. They want to tell you come through B, right? So that's the comfort that we have been able to sort of build, and it takes time to and trust to sort of get built. So
I think banks also have to.
Well.
I'm guessing banks also have limited bandwidth, so they'd rather work with just one player.
Correct.
Than go with 10.
That's right.
As it is, the processes are complex, and they don't want to complicate it any further.
Absolutely, yeah.
Madhu,
in fact, as this business was evolving, we were hit with. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. As this was evolving, we got hit with a demon in 2016, and then suddenly we had like overnight this demand for the merchant side of the business, right? Because the government at that time, November 8, 2016, demand was announced. By third week of November, every bank had targets to sign up merchants to promote the payments, right? So every bank under the sun pinged us saying, do you have a mobile-based acceptance infrastructure, right? So in 6 weeks term virtually, we had like 15 banks that signed up. We were live with 11 of them by Jan 2017. Right? So that business we said we will park and keep aside. Suddenly got a new lease of life, right? And then
so this is going back to
there's
Oink.
Also this is going back to Oink, right?
So that comes back in the play, which you had retired.
Correct. Right, we had retired, and we had like 15 banks that signed up with us. No RFP or the waivers that were taken. They just wanted us to execute, right? And we were sitting and thinking about what does this mean for us as a business, right? While we were, it was all hunky dory. We got a lot of them. There was a market movement towards what's called as a Bharat QR, which is non-existent now, but which was a common QR code across Visa, Mastercard, UPI, and all of that. So we got that enabled.
What happened to Bharat
cranking.
QR?
It's still there. I'll touch on it in a minute. So we started executing on the whole merchant story by itself. Between these banks, we had different strategies for different banks where we, and a lot of the south-based smaller private banks is whom we are customers. Almost all of them, right? A KVB to Federal, all of the banks in the south, we were able to sign up. And what that meant to us as a business was the fact that we got like some 4 lakh merchants in a matter of 4 or 5 months, right? But there were no transactions, right? After cash came back, a lot of these QR codes vanished from the stores, and and it was crazy, right? We had these huge base of merchants. We didn't have cash to sort of promote it. We thought banks will promote it and government will slam dunk, continue to keep that pressure on. Mid 2017, the transactions just evaporated, right? Because cash was back, UPI was cranking volumes, and then we said, maybe this is not working, right? So we got this done, great, but it's not mainstay. We still, while the B2B business was continuing to sort of execute, our second attempt at an Oink 2.0 really didn't get traction. We got all of these merchants. We continue to have some of that. We continue to, in the last about 18 months or so, we see traction happening on that merchant base. We process like a few hundred crores every month, but not of the scale that we would imagine, right? So we've not made any attempt to go back and build that as a business, right? End of story 2017, as far as Oink was concerned. But the B2B business continued to sort of thrive. We started, around that time, what we also did was we did a lot of spray and pray, right? Every fintech that came in, we didn't sort of really worry about what that means for our business. We would partner with them. There's barely any competition for us. What we didn't sort of take in was the fact that the execution time and effort is the same whether it's a small fintech doing 10 transactions or a large fintech doing millions of transactions, right? So when you had finite set of resources, you got your hands full doing number of crazy things. Essentially, we're just praying and praying, saying if you work with 100 companies, maybe 10 of them will succeed, like much like how VCs sort of operate. But we just didn't do any filtering, right? We said anybody coming through the door, happy to partner, right? So you just can start working with us. Somewhere in 2018, we did that reset. We said, this is not going to work. We have to, because we could only grow the teams. Remember we were bootstrapped, right? So we had like whatever little savings that we had, the first couple of years, we burnt it all.
Wait, so hold on. I need to pause here for a second.
Yeah.
So this whole story from 2015 through 2018, you're bootstrapped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, which is why you had a small team, and you're like, hey, even if I get, long tail fintech players, or you get, enterprise accounts, for me, it's the same effort. You couldn't actually segment or put good people on the job. So
the way we used to hire, we signed two client contracts. We used to give out an offer letter, right? Because there is revenue commitment that's coming in, right? So it's not the other way, right?
That's the beauty of B2B.
Yeah, but correct. Yeah.
So I've heard the story from various channels before about how you bootstrap, and people always mention. I think you yourself mentioned the other ZOHO kind of model that you kind of follow.
Yeah. Correct.
I think that's an interesting story by itself. Do you want to talk a little bit about the bootstrapping story? And I know that you've raised a little bit of money in the last few weeks, the last couple of months. So I want to talk through the bootstrapping story though. I think 2018 or 19, you were also part of the group of startups that were bootstrap geniuses or some award that I remember reading about.
So we got recognized by ET for a bootstrap champ. Yeah, the first virtually for the first 5 years we were bootstrapped. I think the beauty of it is when we started out, we never we were initially we were unclear what we were building, right? What's the story that you're going to go and sell? So we said, let's firm this up. Let's get our, lack of a better word, the product market fit, or the market fit for the product, and then kind of go out and raise. But what we realized, and when we also as somebody building a business, you are every day reinventing yourself, right? You're you meet new people. In our client sort of sales effort, we chanced upon ZOHO team. Fascinating story in terms of how they've built, right? I mean, obviously they've taken 20 years to get to where they were. If you really look at amazing success stories of bootstrap companies, ZOHO, for example, right? While it's a 10-year business, I think Nitin has been at it since I think in his teenage, he's probably around his 40s, so probably 20 years he has been at it. So some of these great companies that have got built bootstrapped, they had like a very, very long-term dispassionate view of that business, right? They're basically saying virtually these entrepreneurs have attained nirvana and saying the money is not the motivation. I don't understand the VC world as much. I don't want to put my company through a pressure cooker situation, and really let that entity and the teams thrive and build new capabilities, right? So if ZOHO is the SaaS business, they have been lucky because they had US as a base market. Really look at ZOHO. They got into a very ugly sort of not so much ugly, but not so clean sort of business in stock trading and broking and all of that. They were able to cut the chase and actually build a very transparent, low price product which is loved by everyone. But the real actual traction for them happened probably in the last 2 years, after 18 years, right? So I think
it took 18 years for overnight success.
Absolutely, yeah. So in our mind, we said, as long as we are able to keep the lights on, we should just keep going, right? So we said, there is nothing in this world that is more valuable than that freedom that a bootstrapped entity sort of gives you, right? You can.
So what's the process? Was there a process that you followed to keep it bootstrapped? Because I mean, I worked in payments, and I understand the margins are not great. So you have to hit a certain volume. And that basically means you need to get large enterprise clients. You need to hit your stride before you can actually put money away, take a salary, bunch of things, because you're constantly hiring to fulfill for the other job you've got. So is there a process you followed to make the economics work?
So very simple thing, right? I think one is obviously, first, I think until last year, we never went back to our market salary, right? So clearly we were underpaying ourselves, which is a smaller thing. But the only thing, I mean, the difference between a funded business and a bootstrap company is about looking at it every month, cash flow to cash flow basis. In a funded company, it is burn, right? So how, you always hear about runway and how much of runway that you have in a funded business. In bootstrap company, it is every month, right? So this month end, you need to have needs to pay your salaries. So once you get this fundamental model fixed in your head, you always think about how do I get fixed revenues, right? So what we did in the first year itself was when we were playing and playing with smaller companies, we knew that some of these companies will fail, a lot of them will fail, but we priced ourselves in a model where we're at least be able to chip away half a resource's salary, right? So something like a monthly retainer or a subscription sort of fee. So and that has changed over time. It's not like everywhere we did that. So we would have a theme of a product that is running for 6 months to a year. We'll try and figure out how do I take certain cover under that particular product or idea, so that we are able to keep the lights on, right? And at a certain scale, I think about 18 to 24 months, we started accumulating more cash than what we were burning. So we really stuck it out for 6-8 months, saying we will actually create a reservoir, right? So that there's more money, even if things go south, you have some runway left in terms of working capital that is there, right? It's a hard journey. I think in my sort of 5 years, probably twice we've come to a brink where you have no money in the bank, right? It's really scary. People talk about it being lonely and all of that. It just the team that is there, right? It's basically being open about it to the team and saying that not to say that you're not going to pay. By God's will, we have never skipped even 1 month's salary in our 60 sort of months of being around, right? But the fact that when you are at that moment of truth where there is no money, some serendipity happens, right? So it just somebody out of the blue pays your bill, something happens, and I would attribute a lot of this to just luck, where if we didn't have that luck going our way, right, we probably would not have survived, right? So I think there's no model to this. We were just lucky to figure out early green shoots in front of getting our revenues. We kept our costs super frugal. Was like first year and a half, we used to hike down to Bangalore. I used to take the bus. It's not like I couldn't pay for the flights. Personally, it was not too much of a gap between a flight and a bus. But the truth is, my company couldn't afford, right? So, and personally, I could have done it. But if I don't do this, what's the messaging that I give to my team? How can I expect them to be frugal, right? So it's imperative to sort of be mindful of how you expend in that phase, simply because that could potentially become a lifeline, when things go bad, right? And then so we got out pretty much unscared. 2017-18, we had some kind of revenues that were churning out. And somewhere in this, you also sort of think about where is this headed, right? So we started looking deeply, and you look around the ecosystem. There's a lot of action that's happening. How do you stay relevant to that? How do you make sure that you are able to extract? Ultimately, you've spent a good part of your career building something. After 5 years, you don't want that to become adult, right? So you basically are trying to sort of question yourself as to where are we taking this business, and what's in store for it. So while we had great run with the number of clients that we added, the volumes that they were churning and all of that, there's always this aspect of how big can this become? What can you do with it? And is staying the course the same as should we just do this over and over again for many years together, or could we course correct, right? And that's when the realization of maybe taking help in terms of going out and raising money sort of came in. We looked around. India as a market has its own sort of nuances. It's challenged commercially. To your point, you can have one fine day Geo coming in and sort of you'll have many Geos in many businesses who can virtually come in and take you out of the business. So purely from a de-risking standpoint, we said we'll have to go to other markets and build or replicate the models that we have built. Because what we know for a fact was that what we have in India today is very relevant in every market that is emerging, economy, right? So in Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, it could be that they are in different scales of their maturity curve as at a macro level. But the banking infrastructure are very, very similar, right? Very similar demographic profile and demographic dividend as well. So we said, let's go out and see if we're able to get some runs on the board. So we, about 12 or 18 months ago, we started, testing waters in a few markets. We got some clients signed up. So that's when this whole thought process around raising money, came in.
So you're a Visa partner in Africa. Are they taking you to other, locations as well?
So
how does that work?
Yeah,
does anybody get into the Visa accelerator?
Yeah, so we one of the other things that we were fortunate to do well was the fact that because we were working with a number of startups, you always had a number of VCs who ping you to validate the idea. Because if you have a lending company, let's say you're a VC, you have a lending company which is using our platform, there's some other portfolio that is coming for funding. Who is the first port of call? It's probably their investor, entrepreneurs. They will say, go talk to Madhu, because he'll probably have a better sense of how things are happening, right? So we had over the last 2-3 years, we built great friends with the entire VC community. So until last October, we never had a salesperson, right? So VCs were our sales guys, the bank teams were our sales teams, Visa, MasterCard were our sales team.
You're the only sales guy.
Tell them. That's right. Yeah, I'm the only sales guy, right? I do a fairly bad job of it. So basically, we just figured that you don't need that salespeople. All of these guys whom I mentioned, they carry a lot of heft when they tell someone that go work with Madhu, right? A MasterCard telling or a Visa saying that this is a great team. Why don't you guys work with? People actually respect that, right? Because both me being on the other side, as well as an entrepreneur, I will value a large organization. There is a institutional backing that gets respected, right? So we actually spent a lot of time telling these folks what we are doing differently, what's the excitement that we can drive to them, right? Saying, if a bank is not doing, let me help you do this, right? Because we are actually fulfilling their agenda as well. So we got that going. So in many ways, we have maybe about an army of 200 people who are not on our payroll, but doing sales function for us, right? Across VCs and, some of these large organizations. And in the world that we are in today, where it is mobile-led, mobile-first ecosystem, where in many markets, product ideas get replicated, right? You pick something that's working in the West, say that you want to do it here. In our portfolio today, I have about 6 or 7 Revoluts of India, right? They all want to be the next Revolut. It may work, it may not work. I think it's for them to, and their execution ability and their, ability to raise money. But the truth is, for someone like a Visa or a MasterCard, their role, their day job is to make sure if there are 6 companies that are, trying to become the Revolut of India, they may as well support all 6 of them, right? So that bet on all the horses, one will definitely win, right? So what they needed was air cover to make sure that execution happens. If you go back to my experience, while I can get a fintech to work with a bank, my frustration of starting a company was the fact that execution horsepower was non-existent in the market, right? So we virtually in 5, 6, in 3 or 4 years, have been able to fill in that void which existed and which was my pent-up frustration to say, hey, Visa, MasterCard, if you want to execute, I'll help you do it. I have partner banks who will sort of back me, and I will run this course for you, right? That actually, created a lot of excitement. and thereby they picked us as one of the partners globally, one of the 4 companies globally to, partner with fintechs. You'll find us on their websites to, sign up and work.
That's a huge word of confidence from these players. You mentioned Revolut, and that is one company that has not or looked at India for a little bit, and I don't think they've done much yet. Are there other players doing similar things? I know you're an expert in neo banking right now because you work with a lot of those banks. So I think people are probably curious.
Yes, Revolut specifically. Yeah, sure. Revolut specifically, we may not want to sort of talk about. I think they're trying to get into the market, but I think it will get applied to an Indian context, right? So,
Madhu, are you saying Revolut is coming, or you can't confirm nor deny this?
I don't know. I would put it that way, right?
So they have a team.
They have a team in. Yeah, we are not working with them today. Yeah, we may not be working with them today. So. So they have a team in Singapore. I think they'll figure it out. I think the challenge for there's just a nuance in this, right? If you are a payments business, you have to be locally incorporated, locally hosted, and a whole bunch of things. So the opportunity cost of building that ground up in India and running it and making it viable, Western companies will not be able to do it. Let me tell you, the cost, dynamic of India and the revenue pools that are available in some of these products, for the longest period of time, you'll have to burn a lot of cash, right? And you'll have half a dozen people coming out and replicating that at probably 1/5 of that cost. I think there's also a regulatory aspect to it, which is probably it's more nuanced, may not be relevant for the audience, but what we are seeing right now is the fact that there is heightened action around how fintech, not from a startup community, but fintech as a business line is being viewed, right? That is a step change and a paradigm shift that has happened in the market. By that, what I mean is that much like how 5 or 7 years ago banks were, they probably didn't even wink for an API banking or open banking. Today, every CDO mandate is to make that bank an API bank, right? So there are a few banks that have got it out. A few banks never even have it as CDO, right? You know this. 5-6 years ago, there's no CDO in a banking. The CIO and the CTOs were playing in the role. I think banks have realized this. Large banks like HDFC have reinvented themselves very, very rapidly, and kudos to them. But what we are also seeing is that, and we see this, we talk about it in our, in our investor pitch, is the fact that our ability to serve the disruptor, which is companies that are trying to be Revolut in India, as well as our ability to serve the disrupted, which is who in a travel business is the disrupted, right? Is travel companies like a Thomas Cook or a Wall Street and all of them. So all of these businesses, and India is very unique in that, is the fact that if you look at consumer internet business today, it tops at about 100 million people. Every large consumer internet company in the country, whether it's PhonePe or Make My Trip or a Book My Show, or for that matter, Ola, all of them sort of plateau out about 80 to 100 million people, right? Which is affluent or super affluent, tier 1 town, people like you and me, who have got access to everything possible from a digital commerce and platform standpoint. But if you look at the world beyond that in the country, which is India, 2, 3, 4 cities, those consumers have moved up the value chain, right? So they have, thanks to Geo, all of them have access to a screen, they have data access, they are consuming digital content, but the businesses that serve them have not moved on, right? Have not caught up, right? Like a gold loan provider, you still need to go to an outlet, pledge your gold, carry that cash, right? Whereas there is a company called Rupeek which got invested. I think they raised like a significant large Series C.
63 million.
It's actually getting
66 million.
It's actually coming to your doorstep and doing it. You can just at a press of a button, like ordering food on Swiggy, you could actually order a gold loan product, right? Think of a world without that happening, right? So fantastic, sort of from a ecosystem standpoint.
Let me just pause for a second over there, right? You mentioned some of these companies that are getting large. I mean, Rupeek specifically has a large check that is written. And help me understand. So currently the platform is to serve fintechs that cannot necessarily work with banks directly. But if they're large enough, wouldn't that give them the onus to go and create it? Like, is there any moat there? I'm trying to understand how would the dynamics work?
Sure. Yeah. So I think just to sort of wrap that point. So we have a lot of these companies that are seeing that they're getting disrupted, right? Like in travel services, unless you also have a Revolut kind of experience, if not the same product, at least somewhere closer to that, so that you can hold on and ring fence your customer base not get churned out. Likewise in digital lending, right? So we have companies like Early Salary, Red Carpet, Slice, who are all digital lenders who are serving the tier 1 town. But we also have a TVS Credit and a Muthoot who are basically serving that segment which is not on the digital bandwagon. So we see a significantly larger base of customers and acceleration happening because these are businesses that are flush with cash, large physical infrastructure, huge customer moat. They don't have to worry about CAC, right? They don't have to worry about collection because those things are sorted, right? So what we are essentially doing is basically saying, for all of these organizations, it's very hard for them to, reset their operational process and change it. So it's long gestation from a sales cycle standpoint. But once you get there, it's fascinating how, network effects and start playing out. So to your point, it doesn't matter whether it's the size of the company or what, to your question rather, what scale of execution they are in. We have seen companies adopt and just build on top of it. Ola is a classic example. They use our platform for their access to capital or customers or banks. They could have easily got that built, or for that matter, resource tech talent, right? They could have easily got built whatever we are offering them, right? But there is a lot more nuanced, execution, horsepower that is required to run that business, right? So it's always a constant, balancing of should I build it or sort of rent it out. And in many cases, renting becomes better, even at scale, right? At Ola scale, if they're saying at a Ola or a Cred or a Make My Trip or Paisa Bazaar, they all believe that renting is a better model, so that's why they work with us. We haven't seen customer churn out and build it in-house. It's never happened, right? So. And even if that happens, we today, by virtue of betting on both the disruptor and the disrupted, we really don't care. We're not hung up about one customer, failing, for instance, right? Or moving away from this business because it's no longer a focus. Because, we're like 200 different companies. My best of customer will not be more than 3 or 4% of my revenues, right? So not to say that they're not important, but it doesn't disrupt us from a operational and how we run. It's not like one company moves out and we are out in the street, right? That in effect is like insurance for us, where you'll always have several companies coming in and coming out, and keep the engine humming.
No, that's a good point. I think more and more what I'm hearing from you is businesses are willing to rent and not build their own. For a long time, that was not the case in India, right? People prefer to build their own rather than have to work with you. And the question always like, oh, you're a startup or you're too small. What does your balance sheet look like? Which continues to be a challenge in a lot of segments. So it's nice to hear that this has been the scenario. So working with a lot of these VCs.
So just one comment there. So when we started, you always have this challenge of what if you go down and all of that, right? Today, what a bank went through, there is no certainty for anybody to be, forever entity, right? I think it's a lot to do with, and this especially for entrepreneurs who are dealing with large companies. This is purely about identifying what that pain point that you're solving for that decision maker. Right? That's it. It doesn't matter whether you are an extremely well-run ship, whether you're funded or not. Are you actually solving a pain point for that decision maker? In your days, that is all that matters. If you are able to, get him or her score brownie points, help him with his promotion, whatever that product or idea that you're selling, it's going to find takers. At least you'll get a POC. I think it's just that you have to find that sweet spot, and finding and latching onto that is the hard part. Yeah.
No, it's a relevant point. I'm seeing also from what you're saying is that banks, large businesses are also keen on going to market quickly because the rug is being pulled from under them, right? They're being out maneuvered by startups. People are moving very quickly, being bootstrapped. They have no hierarchy. So I think that mindset is also kind of coming into, and I mean, I would imagine that a chief digital officer would have that mindset to say, okay, I need to work exactly like how a startup would and build my systems and tools based on that. Fantastic. From the last 1 year, 2018 to 2019, you believe that, and to 2020, you believe that there's a need for outside money to come in and help kickstart this process. So the more recent news is that couple of incredible angels as well as a host of seed and VC funds have come in. How did that happen?
Yeah.
What is the process you followed to get there? And I think your investor BNext is the latest round. I think you announced it a week or so ago. How did that happen? How did you choose from a plethora of options you had?
Yeah, I think all along we have had this optionality of raising money, right? We never were serious about it. We always felt that we'll continue to be bootstrapped for the longest period of time. But somewhere last year, we also realized that our ability to execute, and it occurs in 2 or 3 areas, right? One, in my early days when we were looking to hire people, we had folks who came in and said, "What's the stake that you're giving in?" Right? So we said, "Dude, we are not funded. We are not looking at ESOP and all. If you want to join, there's salary, and we'll make we'll have a good place to work and learn." And we always thought about what is this wealth creation and how it can help get more from the herd to go out and build new companies, which is what capital and money is all about for a number of successful entrepreneurs, is their ability to actually go reinvest and pay it forward, right? So it's not like it's not a lottery ticket for them to splurge and say that some of these companies will could potentially multiply their money. I think you get to a point where you believe that you will have an ability to be that agent of change by helping them. I think Kunal uses this term. It has to become an epidemic of sorts for more companies to get built, right? So when we looked at ourselves and saying, how do we build this as a team? Like, we took a lot of inspiration from our early days from ZOHO, where we picked up people from small towns, right? Where we had hired just out of college kids, people who cannot speak fluent English. Essentially, we gave them a platform to learn and grow, right? Today, in our company, we have a person going out on sales call. A technology lead an architect actually goes and handles customer service issues. So our ability to move people around, put them in uncomfortable zone. We don't pay, we actually pay well, but we don't do all of this and offsites and having a fancy office, none of that at all, right? The truth is, we had the core team stick together. Our attrition in the last 3 or 4 years is sub 3% or 4%. And there's something that we are doing right, which is keeping the herd together, right? And when we keep talking to the team, a lot of things that sort of, you're able to reflect back, right? In terms of saying a very, very, very simple thing like, why don't you nudge an ops resource to learn coding and move to the, coding side of things, right? It's a great, backing for him or her individually, right? It's basically you're putting a trust on them. And they may fail a few times, it doesn't matter, but they actually get a lot more confidence, and inherently it builds trust in a bond with you and them, right? So they'll always perceive you doing good for them and good for their careers. So so we never had hired like senior, folks from the industry. We've groomed people, and you will find this as a recurring theme in a ZOHO and a Zerodha. If you just actually sort of look around, the fact that they put team and people over profits and say, it's not about giving big bonuses. It's not about having flashy offices. And that's what I would call it as culture, right? Is the ability for you to sort of think organization wide. I have guys who are 24/7. Anything in the middle of the night, some customer sends email, they'll jump in and respond. And you'll have a herd of people who are also not doing a great job, and that's an area for improvement. But they get just self-motivated, right? So we don't do counseling sessions. Obviously we give feedback in terms of when things go wrong, but that's real time. There's no formal every year appraisal cycle. It happens almost every quarter. We do like pay hikes whenever we feel like. We don't. Almost for the last 4 years, we have been giving out bonuses the day, the month, or the year ends. Right? There's no lag. All of this is inefficiency that is there. The challenge is to keep that. We are today a 80, 90 member team. If you grow to 500 people, are you able to do it? If you grow to 5,000 people, are you able to do it? So at different scales, you might have different sort of challenges to keep at it. But for now, we are sort of keeping that herd together. So we also sort of realized that in our just coming back to your funding question, when we have everything going right, we have great customers, great team, we are doing all the good stuff. What is it that you can do more, which doesn't upset your existing humming engine, but really put yourself in a different sort of pedestal, right? So you're able to activate, and fundamentally for us, the reason for starting up is not to do this for eternity, but it becomes an agent of change, right? So this, if we have great outcomes for all of us, it just helps us to create an impact, which is what our reason for starting up itself. So we realized that we need to probably have, for us to be seen in the market as somebody where we can raise money, we said we need to get people whom the market recognizes, right? And then we went, thankfully for me, I knew Jiten, I knew Amrish to some extent. Went and had a conversation with them. It like in one coffee conversation, it kind of happened, and thanks to Amrish and Jiten, Kunal, all of them, right? So. And so, we had this optionality because of the fact that we've been at it for a while, and people generally had like a view of us, right? Good, bad, ugly. So getting them on board was more like a validation of sorts, right? It was not really about the money or, what's our ability to raise. And today, I can virtually start a new company and raise like $20-25 million without blinking an eye. But the truth is, how much of this money is something that you need to meet your aspirations that you set for yourself, right? And that can also sort of change, right? Because what we were doing for the first 4.5 years was running a ship which basically, to my earlier point, get revenues and then go out and give offer letters, to actually changing that organization thinking, right? So which is the hard part that we are going through now as founders, right? We still think about should we fly in the previous evening or save on that hotel cost so that you can, you fly in the next morning so that you can save on the hotel cost. That just comes as, it's not like, our investor is going to question why did you stay overnight in a hotel. But that DNA mutation takes a lot of time, right? So thereby, what we did with what this money means for us is it just liberates us to do a lot more, test new waters. Also, we see adjacent opportunities where companies are there. Maybe there's an opportunity to go out and do some acqui-hire, right? Where there is some valuable businesses that we see. So that air cover is what this money means for us. We did like a friends and family. In 2016, we raised about 70 lakh rupees, I think. Almost about 55 lakh of that money is still in the bank, right? So we I think there's just comfort in today's world, the world that we are in. We are like, we are in a great place because we have, even if you don't crank any money, any revenues, we still have like a 2-year or a 3-year runway to sort of cover. And we're just looking at this saying, great. We need people to sort of back us, who can help us in our aspirations to go to other markets. In that, BNext actually had fintech heavy portfolio across Southeast Asia. Their founders have had great validations from them. So, and we met Dirk, and we had like a gypsy handshake in the first meeting, right? No number crunching, no validation externally. It just happened, over one or two sort of meetings. I think, so people see through it in the sense that because you've been at it for a while, you don't need to really, people get the story better than how you can sell yourself, right?
You have marquee clients. Nothing can take that away from you.
For sure. Yeah.
Phenomenal. Hey, Madhu, this has been phenomenal. Amazing insights, a lot of time spent on a few topics. I'm sure we can go deeper into just bootstrapping and neobanking and a bunch of other things that you guys have done. But I guess we'll have to have you back on the podcast to share about those. But sure. This has been great. Thanks for coming on the podcast and speaking with us. But before I go, how do people get in touch with you? You said you're hiring, you're acqui-hiring, and probably the time is right for acqui-hires. I'm sure a lot of people are going to go under in this market scenario. So how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm active on the social profiles. We pretty much have, the best way is to talk to one of the fintech founders we work with. 8 out of 10 fintechs in India work with us. I'm just going to brag about it. But
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So we are accessible all the time here. So we work pretty much all 7 days. Yeah.
I will leave your Twitter handle and LinkedIn profile on wherever I post these things. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, they can. Sure. Thanks again, Madhu. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Varun. Pleasure talking to you. Yeah.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Stars and Startups with me, Varun Vumidi. If you'd like to reach out to Madhu, you can find him on Twitter and LinkedIn. He's extremely easy to approach. Or you can always get in touch with me and I'll be more than glad to make introductions. Do spread the word about my show and do subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Links available in show notes. See you soon. We're not done yet. If you're a startup or a small team, do check out my startup, wellmo.in. We enable small businesses access affordable health insurance for less than 2,000 rupees for a 3 lakh hospitalization cover. Does that sound good to you? Yep. You can get started easily on our easy to use platform app.wellmo.in and have your employees covered today. If you have any questions, do reach out to me. I'll be happy to talk more about Wellmo.